Kirkwood Call, I'm Thomas Birmingham.
And I'm Izzy Cologne.
In this episode, the midterms, Missouri, and two close elections.
On November 6th, Kirkwood, along with the rest of the nation, will vote on the future of our government.
And as the elections draw closer, more eyes across the country turn towards the increasingly tight races for House and Senate on the Missouri ballot.
Today, we'll explore how your vote could impact the outcome of these elections.
This is the Politi-Call.
Yeah, so the Missouri senatorial election between the incumbent Democrat Claire McCaskill and the challenger, the Republican Josh Hawley, is one of the closest in the country right now.
That's Lucas Ravenscraft, a government and politics teacher at Kirkwood High School.
He's discussing the open Missouri Senate seat.
Basically, this race is a total toss-up right now. No one has any idea who's going to win. Like, it could go either way. So, I mean, this is like one of the races in the country right now.
Looking at Missouri specifically, can you tell us a little bit about the two candidates who are up for the Senate seat that's open in Missouri?
As far as the two candidates, we'll start with the incumbent. So the incumbent is just the person who already has the job, who's running for re-election, and that's Claire McCaskill. She actually is from Kirkwood. She lives in the district, if you aren't aware of that. She's 65 years old. She's been a two-term senator, so she's been in the Senate for 12 years already. She was first elected in 2006. She took the seat from a Kirkwood grad, Jim Talent, a Republican who had been the senator before her. She defeated him in 2006, and then in 2012, she defeated Todd Aiken, who actually used to be a representative representing Missouri 2nd, which is the district where Kirkwood is in. So it's got a lot of weird Kirkwood connections in this to McCaskill in this Senate seat. She's currently the ranking member, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Homeland Services Committee, or Homeland Security Committee. She's also a member of the Armed Services Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. So that's kind of her areas of involvement. She's big with military budgets and stuff like that, which is big for Missouri because of Boeing and St. Louis specifically. Before she was in the Senate, she was the state auditor, Missouri state auditor. She's an attorney. She was the Jackson County prosecutor, and she earlier in her career was in the Missouri House. She's currently ranked as one of the most moderate senators in the entire Senate from either side. Even though she's a Democrat, she actually votes with Trump about 47% of the time. So she's really, she's a Democrat, but she really is one of the most moderate, if not the most moderate Democrats out there. Although she did vote against Kavanaugh, so she's stuck with the Democrats on that one. Right. Certainly there was a lot of pressure on her to vote against Kavanaugh, especially because she's a woman. That's unfair, but just the reality is there was extra pressure on the female senators to vote against him because of the sexual assault allegations, and she did vote against him. Now she's running against Josh Hawley. He's a very different candidate. He's much younger. He's almost half her age. He's only 38. He's from Kansas City. He grew up, outside of Kansas City. He went to Rockhurst High School, so that's like a private Catholic school in Kansas City. He is currently holding the position of Missouri Attorney General, so that's the state's top lawyer. And he is endorsed by Trump. Trump's come to Missouri and campaigned for him. Trump was recently in Springfield. He spoke at Missouri State, and that was like a big campaign event on behalf of Josh Hawley. As Attorney General, he was one of a number of state attorneys general who joined a suit challenging the constitutionality of Obamacare a couple years ago. So he's kind of anti-Obamacare. He's got a 93% rating from the NRA, which means he votes the way the NRA would want him to vote 93% of the time. He's a conservative, but he's pretty young, and he hasn't held a long political office or a major statewide office. Attorney General is the first statewide office he's held. So he's definitely more politically inexperienced than McCaskill and a lot younger. So those are the two candidates right now. And like I said, it's basically a toss-up.
All right, and then can you tell us a little bit about the House race?
Yeah, so the Missouri 2nd, which is the district that includes Kirkwood, is currently held by a Republican, Ann Wagner, who's running for re-election. She has been in the House for 3 terms, so they're 2-year terms, so just 6 years. So even though McCaskill's been in for 2 terms, she's been in Congress for 12 years. Wagner's been in for 3 terms in the House, but that's only 6 years.
Okay.
So she was first elected in 2012. Before she ran for the House, she was the co-chair of the Republican National Committee and actually helped preside over the 2004 presidential Republican National Convention. So she's held some national level political jobs within the Republican Party before representing Missouri 2nd. In 2016, her last election, she won with 60% of the vote, so she won a really strong majority in 2016. So this seat is viewed as pretty safe for Ann Wagner. She's 56 years old. She went to Mizzou, and that's the Republican incumbent. She is being challenged by Court Van Ostren. He's the Democrat. He is young. He has no prior political experience. He's never held elected office before. He's an attorney. He's been like a visiting lecturer at a law school, so more or less like a law professor. And he's been like a political activist and organizer before, working for multiple different campaigns. The reason, Court is a big underdog in this race, certainly. But the reason he's been getting a lot of buzz more recently is because of his fundraising advantage. In the last 2.5 months, he's outraised Wagner like by double. So there is certainly in this election year, there's a lot of Democratic enthusiasm, and so that's even showing in a local level for the Missouri 2nd, and that he has raised more money than she has. Although I do think it's going to be a real uphill climb for him to unseat Wagner, especially as a 3-term incumbent. There's a pretty strong advantage for incumbents, especially in the House, much more so than in the Senate. So, incumbents win about like 85% of the time in House races, and so that's a really big hill to climb for Court. But certainly, he has a chance, but I would say a small chance right now. It looks pretty likely that Wagner is gonna retain the seat. Although, like I said, the fundraising has really helped in this like last month push, possibly to put Court up there in contention.
Okay. And so how does the Missouri Senate race play into the overall, what overall could happen to the Senate specifically? Yeah,
so the Missouri Senate race is really crucial. Obviously, the talk has been, because of high Democratic enthusiasm, there's been talk of, can Democrats flip the House and the Senate? Flipping the Senate is definitely going to be a lot tougher than flipping the House for Democrats, and if they want to do that, they basically need to hold on to all the seats that they currently have and then pick up additional seats. Now, the math is bad for Democrats this time, so overall, out of the number of seats that are kind of considered toss-ups, of those seats right now, 4 of the 6 are held by Democrats, and only 2 of the 6 are held by Republicans. So even just to pick up 2 seats in the Senate, but just because of that, the Missouri Senate seat really matters. If the Democrats have any chance of flipping the Senate, they have to hold on to all the seats that they have. And so that means that McCaskill has to win. If Hawley beats McCaskill, it's basically done. Like, Democrats are not going to take back the Senate if McCaskill loses. Okay. That means that McCaskill has to win. If Hawley beats McCaskill, it's basically done. Like, Democrats are not going to take back the Senate if McCaskill loses.
Right. And then can you describe the effects of the Senate majority flipping versus what the effects would be of the House flipping?
Yeah, so the Senate flipping would be a much bigger deal on policy and on Trump specifically. It would impact Trump's ability to get through future executive branch and judicial nominations. There's been kind of a historically high level of turnover in the Trump administration with those executive positions. And so if that continues, he would just have a harder time getting his nominees through if Democrats took over the Senate. And then, of course, there's the potential that in the next 2 years there'll be another Supreme Court vacancy. Trump's already filled 2. He was able to get both Gorsuch and Kavanaugh through just because of the Republican majority in the Senate. So Democrats would need to take back a majority to have any chance of stopping any of Trump's nominees in the next 2 years for executive or judicial offices. Also, I mean, this is a bit of a long shot, but there's been impeachment talk too about Trump based on some of the stuff that's come out through the Mueller probe, and whatever the results of that end up being. But there has to be to remove the president from office. You need a supermajority vote of the Senate. You need 60 votes in the Senate. So I mean, that's not going to happen, just straight out. But it could put a little bit more pressure on Trump if there was a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. Now, the House could impeach the president, but if there's not 60 votes to convict in the Senate, there's kind of no point to that. That's like what happened with Bill Clinton, right? The House impeached, but the Senate acquitted because there weren't 60 votes to remove him from office. Now, if the House flips, which does seem likely, that would mean that basically the Republicans wouldn't be able to just pass whatever laws that they want, because right now they can, right? So with control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, as long as the Republicans hang together and all vote as a bloc, anything that they want, they can pass. Now, they haven't successfully done that every time, right? Of course, last summer you had the famous John McCain, thumbs down, that killed the skinny repeal of Obamacare. Stuff like that has happened over time in the last couple of years. But certainly if the House flips Democratic, that would just mean that we would have gridlock. It would basically mean that very little would get done in the next 2 years. So if you're a Republican, that would be a bad thing because you would kind of waste the last 2 years of Trump's first term. Not being able to do much. If you're a Democrat, then that's a good thing because you probably don't like the policies that the Republicans have been passing. But you could basically stop anything now because every new law would have to go through the House and the Senate. And if the Democrats have a majority in the House, that's all they need to stop legislation. They just wouldn't be able. It's only the Senate that votes on nominees. So like the Supreme Court, the House has no impact on that. So that's why the Senate gets more attention, is more important, has those extra powers. But the House is still important, and certainly it looks like it's probably equally as likely that the Democrats take the House as it is that the Republicans will hold on to the Senate.
And in the Missouri Senate race, with the intensity of this race in particular, what has the campaign looked like?
A lot of money getting dumped into this race from both sides. There's been a ton of ads all over TV and the internet. I'm sure that you guys have seen the ads on both sides. It just means that, because of the importance of the race, it gets a lot more national attention, right? So McCaskill and Hawley will both get support from their national senatorial campaign committees. There'll be a lot of PAC money, like buying independent expenditure ads, and so those tend to just be even more extreme than like the candidate-sponsored ads. So in coming down to the last 3 weeks or so, definitely keep your eye on how crazy those ads get. They'll probably, they've been, I would say not like overly attacky recently. It's getting more that way, and you tend to get more like extreme attack ads the closer you get to the election, especially when it's going to be close like this. So just look for probably McCaskill trying to paint Hawley as like just a Trump clone, and Hawley trying to paint McCaskill as like a super liberal who doesn't represent Missouri. And that's kind of the tactic that both of these candidates have been taking, because of the controversial nature of the presidency. It's not always going to help to be associated, at least in certain areas, right? So I think that's really what you're going to see. You're just going to see a ton of money and a ton of national attention, honestly. There'll probably be a bunch of national reporters in Missouri, certainly on Election Day, but probably leading up to that. There's going to be a bunch of polling done in Missouri because of the importance of the race, because it is probably the closest race. And like I said before, it just really matters. Like if the Democrats want to flip the Senate, they have to win this race. They really can't do it. The math doesn't work out if they don't keep the seat.
And what impressions, if any, have you been getting from your students about, the Senate race or the House race in Missouri?
I just think that this election is maybe a tipping point for young people as far as their political engagement. Now we'll see if the younger vote actually comes out. I mean, this is not to be cynical, but I mean, I kind of am on this, but not kind of. I am cynical on this. I'm going to be cynical. Sorry. There's been like a million think pieces like every 6 to 8 years on like, is this the year where the youth vote comes out and for the first time like makes a difference? And like, of course, there's all kinds of think pieces about that this year too. In the past, that's never come to fruition. You know, the 18 to like 28 demographic or whatever is by far the lowest voting demographic as far as turnout. You know, like 18 to 30-year-olds basically vote at like a 30% rate, whereas like 55 and plus vote at like a 70% rate. So I think I have noticed more interest in the students in talking about the race than probably midterms in the past. I mean, presidential years are always very energizing. I think the difference that I've noticed is that it's a midterm year and young people seem to be really energized. A lot of people just commenting on how many ads they're seeing. I get that all the time. Oh my gosh, every time I watch a YouTube video, I have to watch like a Josh Hawley or a Claire McCaskill ad. So I feel like, you know, people are being, the media is being really saturated, and that's really because of what I talked about as far as the money that's being poured into this race in Missouri because of the importance of that race. We also know statistically that young people tend to skew more liberal, so more likely to vote Democratic. So if there is a big uptick in younger voter turnout, then that would tend to be good for people like Claire McCaskill in Missouri, or you know, someone like Bill Nelson in Florida. Certainly in Florida too, because Florida's got a lot of old people, and they're definitely going to vote. So yeah, I think that it seems like there's a lot more enthusiasm amongst younger people, but being the maybe like grizzled skeptic that I am at this point, a political observer. I think that, you know, I'll believe it when I see it. If I feel more energy, but the proof is ultimately going to be in the pudding on election day, and we'll see what the turnout rates are. I think it is important that young people get involved in politics, pay attention, and vote. Like, if you want to know why, like, if young people want to know why politicians don't seem to represent their views, it's because they literally don't care about your views because you don't vote. And that's just the reality. Mm-hmm. They care about the views of old people because old people vote. And they need to keep their jobs and get elected. So they need to do the math on who they listen to. And that math all has to do with voter turnout. And so until the younger people start voting at a higher rate, they're always going to get overlooked in politics. And I know that there's been a lot of activism with young people recently, especially with like the March for Our Lives movement and all the stuff after the Parkland shooting. And that's important and that needs to happen. But if you show up to a rally or a protest and you don't show up on election day, you're wasting your time. Like, what are you doing? Show up and vote. And that's the only way that anything's ever going to change. And that's the only way that politicians are going to start listening to younger people. They may pay lip service, but ultimately when they vote, they're thinking about how is this going to impact my likelihood of getting reelected next time. And so that's really the only way that you can put the fear in politicians is by showing up. And if you don't like what they do, you got to show up. It's not super fun. It's not super sexy to go out and vote on like a rainy Tuesday in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
You know, you get the cool sticker and everything that like makes you feel superior to people who don't have the sticker, which is nice. And like it's good. You can do it for the gram, right? Like you can you can take your selfie with your I voted sticker and put that on Instagram. You know, maybe there'll be a custom Snapchat filter for election day. I don't know how these things work. I'm old, but like do it. Whatever it takes. Like people need to go out and vote, and I hope that that's what happens this election cycle. But we will certainly see in a few weeks.
And you know, realistically, with the attention that this Senate race has gotten, no matter who wins, how could this really affect, you know, like students at Kirkwood?
Well, I mean, the biggest way is the Supreme Court. I feel like I just keep going back to it, but that really is right now the biggest thing. The Supreme Court has a huge say over the way that our laws are interpreted and enforced. You know, even I know we're on a political podcast for a student newspaper. Even issues like, you know, prior restraint of the press, speech in schools, that kind of stuff. Like the Supreme Court is who ultimately has a say on that. And currently, as constituted, there's a 5-4 conservative majority on the Supreme Court now that Kennedy retired, he was the swing vote. There used to be four liberals, 4 conservatives, and 1 swing vote. Now it's a 5-4 conservative majority, and so that's really the biggest thing. If Hawley beats McCaskill, it's almost a guarantee that the Republicans will control the Senate. So if there's any movement on the Supreme Court, for instance, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg resigns or, heaven forbid, passes away in the next couple years, that would be, she's the oldest justice currently on the court, and so she would be statistically the most likely to not be on the court next. If that happens in the next 2 years and the Republicans maintain control of the Senate, guess what? It's going to be a 6-3 conservative majority on the court, and especially with what Trump's been doing with specifically picking out young justices, in their early 50s, these people are going to be on the court for 30 and 40 years, right? Mm-hmm. Which means that if Ginsburg were to, let's just be frank, if she were to pass away in the next 2 years, she's not going to resign because she doesn't want Trump to be able to replace her. Right. But if something happens to her in the next couple of years, that could be a 6-3 conservative majority on the court, and those people, because Trump has appointed Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, who are both in their early 50s, Supreme Court justices almost always now are serving into their mid-80s. So we're talking 35 years of each of those guys on the court. You guys at 18 in 35 years, you'll basically be 53? Think about that. That's your whole life that these people are going to be on the court. And if the Senate stays this way, then that could be, and something happens to Ginsburg or one of the other 3 other liberal justices, probably not Kagan or Sotomayor, but if something were to happen, then 6-3. That's a pretty strong and unshakable conservative majority. The oldest conservative on the court right now is Clarence Thomas, and he's only in his 70s, so he's probably got another decade on the court at least. So it's going to be a minute before there is any of these conservatives are going to be off the court. We're talking about a generation of a very conservative Supreme Court. That's the deal with the Senate, and that's why it's so getting so much attention this year.
And what's the best way for people to make sure that they're informed and they, they're prepared for when they're voting for these positions?
Yeah, there's a couple websites that I like that I think anyone could go to kind of either figure out where they stand and who they agree with, and then also learn a little bit more about what's going to be on the ballot. The first one I would recommend is isidewith.com. That's a real kind of in-depth personal survey that you can take, and then not only will it tell you your political leanings, but it'll identify candidates, and based on their stated positions, it'll tell you you agree more with this candidate than that candidate. So if you're just I don't know anything about I don't even necessarily know what type of candidate or what party I prefer, I'll put in my views and then it'll kind of spit it out for me. That's a decent site that, kind of more political novice who are wanting to get involved, that's a good starting place. If you are already more kind of involved and kind of know at least what your views are, Vote Save America is a website that not only does voter registration, but also you can download a sample ballot for every jurisdiction across the country. So if you go to votesaveamerica.com/ballot, you can learn more. You can put in your address, and you can literally just see what the ballot is going to be before you go in on election day. And it also gives you some really easy to navigate information about what are the different ballot initiatives, what do they mean, who are the candidates, what are their stances. You can pick from a drop-down menu on issues that you might care about, and then they have quotes from the different candidates about that issue. Okay. So you can help not only learn what's on the ballot, but what have the candidates said about the issues that you care about. And then also, of course, there's going to be props on the ballot too. So, in Missouri, there's a ton this year of different propositions on the ballot. Everything from, Prop 1 is the one about political corruption. Prop 2 is medicinal marijuana. There's Prop Z is a tax raise for the zoo. I see all those Z's for zoo signs around. Those are cute. But there's a bunch. There's a bunch of props. And so before you go in, you should definitely do your research, figure out what's on the ballot, because the worst thing is if you go in and you're I can't vote on half of these because I don't even know who these people are or what this means. And so, if you can't vote this time, you can register to vote when you're in Missouri when you're 17 and a half. So get ready for the next election. When you're 17 and a half, register to vote. Show up and vote. When you go to college, get that absentee ballot. When you come home for fall break or print it out online, turn it in. You got to vote. If people don't vote, they don't get listened to.
Next time on the Politi-Call, we will be analyzing the results of the midterm elections.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to vote on November 6th.